on Facebook, and looks like we're live on Twitter also. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Saplodowski, publisher of BodyBuzz.com, and today we're going to be talking to the Louisiana Legislature and politics, maybe throwing a little national politics to go along with it. We have our good friend Jim Brown, JimBrownLA.com. And everybody knows the background, 28 years in statewide government officials, senator, etc. And we also have Tom Aswell. Tom is the publisher of LouisianaVoice.com, one of my favorite writers here in Louisiana. So we're going to be talking about this session. I'm going to be showing some tweets and let it rip. So, Jim, why don't you take it over and introduce Tom Aswell? You know what he's published, so go ahead, please.
Well, Tom's a prolific writer who writes under his own website, LouisianaVoice.com, and his articles are picked up by papers across the state, and he's written for years. Used to write up in Ruston Ledger, I guess, many, many years ago, and down here in Baton Rouge now. Glad to have Tom join us as we kind of analyze what's happening in the state. Of course, the big news right now, Steve and Tom, I think, is the winding down of another special session, the sixth special session of the legislature. There is a vote almost as we speak, probably an hour or so away. The legislature, the House of Representatives, will vote on a budget that requires 70 votes to pass because there are new taxes involved or a renewal of a tax that's about to expire. Governor's ballyhooing this as a tax reduction because instead of keeping the entire one additional penny that was put on temporarily a couple of years ago, he only wants a half a cent. And that sounds like it might be reasonable, but Republicans have got their heels dug in and have been in the last several votes have voted against it. A number of Democrats, primarily members of the Black Caucus, thinks that number one, it's a tax increase on people they represent, number one, and number two, that programs that were of interest have been left out of the budget. So it's a convoluted group that's opposing the governor, and it's a question whether it'll get 70 votes. And so that's the perspective that we're watching right now. And as I say, this will go into the next hour or two. Let's assume they don't get the 70 votes. Then this session will shut down and there will be another special session. In fact, just to give you some of the rumors going around, I have no reason to think this is true, but several legislators have told me just today that they think the governor wouldn't mind this being voted down because it gives him political fodder to beat up on the Republicans and say they're causing all the problems in the state. I'm skeptical of that, but that's what they both told me here early today. So the legislature is what the focus is in terms of the budget coming down to a wire, another special session. And Tom, I don't know just what to project. I don't know if you've been watching this budget fight at all or not, but we'll know here later on today whether we go into another special session, another $60,000 a day over so many days, or whether something's going to get done. Now, you got a perspective on it, Tom?
Well, I agree with you that the governor won't take advantage of that and beat up on the Republicans because that doesn't seem to be his style. Frankly, I wish he would. He needs to flex his muscle a bit. He is the governor. He is the chief executive officer of this state, and he needs to act like one, and he's not asserting himself as I think he should. The other Edwin Edwards, certainly would have done so. He would have called the legislative leaders in and read them the riot act. They would have had to come to Jesus meeting long before now. And this mess would have been straightened up. And I think that's what Governor John Bel Edwards needs to do. Barring that, he needs to borrow a page from the Reagan playbook and go to the people and present his case to the people and let them contact their legislators. That's what Reagan was a master at that. And I've seen, I don't know, I just don't see the passion with John Bel that I hoped I would see when he got elected.
And I could pick up on that, Steve,
Sure.
if I can, and echo exactly what Tom Aswell is talking about. There's a couple perspectives. First of all, I've had some legislators tell me, well, he doesn't have the tools that Edwin Edwards or past governors had. First of all, the state's broke. He doesn't have anything to give out, and therefore it's hard to squeeze these legislators, especially with just a year to go until we're into their election. And so they don't mind digging in their heels, number one, particularly when he knows when there's a few he's got a real uphill fight getting reelected. But Tom, I would agree with you this: if the governor would call us and advise us here in this show, I'm sure he's watching this podcast right now. He's making a mistake if he doesn't. But I would tell the governor this, that picking up on what you said, Tom, I don't see the vision. I think he's a decent guy that's trying hard on a day in, day out basis. And he's dealing with a lot of real crises. But every now and then you just got to let, it's brush fires. Every day wakes up to brush fires. Sometimes you've got to let some of those brush fires burn, because 7 out of 10 times they take care of themselves. He's got to step back and give a state of vision, a reason to support his program and lean on legislators. If I were him, I'd say, get out of the Capitol, get out of the governor's mansion, crisscross this state, speaking to groups right and left, saying, just as Ronald Reagan would have done, and saying, look, I need your help. This state is in a real crisis, and we need you to back me up and lay out a plan. Here's what we need to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It drove me crazy when Buddy Roemer, when I ran against him for governor, used to say, let me be specific. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my gosh. But it's good. It works. And he's not doing that, Steve, just as Tom said. He's not expressing that vision or getting people riled up to support him. Therefore, two choices: get the people riled up or arm twist legislators. And as we've talked about before, he doesn't really have much moxie to twist those arms. Number one, it's not his style, but number two, you can't threaten to take away projects because there's no money for the projects to begin with.
And that's really, I think that's what the problem is. If I might just cut you off, Tom, for a second, and that is that in my opinion, I don't think that he has the resources to be able to apply pressure on the legislature in terms of going out to the public. I don't think he has the support of the people to be able to really get out there, emotionally make impact. I'm looking at Buddy Roemer in terms of the little thing that he had in terms of fiscal reform, and you saw how that ended up. It turned out that David Duke beat him to it, and I just don't think. And I'm sorry, Buddy Roemer certainly had a much better speaking ability, style, and persuasiveness than does John Bel Edwards. So,
absolutely,
yeah. So I just don't know if he is able to get out there and do this. The last person who did it, I think, was Mike Foster on Louisiana Inc., if you remember. I think it was called, he was lucky to get some support, but it wasn't because of him per se in terms of his getting out there to speak. I think it was Steve Perry, but even that had a lot of problems. So I don't know. I mean, when he lost the House Speaker, that was it. And so it's really hard when everybody, when the House and the Senate is pretty much against you, particularly the House. Again, I just think that you have limits in terms of what you can do. So I mean, that's my two cents. But go ahead.
When Huey Long ran for governor, when he was on the Public Service Commission, he spoke at Shrewsbury one time, and as he was speaking, the train came through and didn't stop. And he said, that train didn't stop here. He says, if I'm your governor, it'll stop. And that's what John Bel needs to. He needs to go to every parish, find out what that parish needs, what their wants are, and address each specific need in each specific parish. And say, Tensas Parish, you need pure drinking water. Lincoln Parish, you need buildings for Grambling and Louisiana Tech. And on down the line in each separate parish, and point out the needs to them. That if you don't get my programs passed, you're never going to see these projects. And I think that's a tactic that he needs to employ.
So let me ask you, both of y'all this, and that is that, well, first to piggyback on what you're saying, if you don't have any money to deploy them, it's kind of hard to make a promise and say, okay, this is what this is what you're going to get.
That's how you get your taxes passed. That's how you get your taxes passed, is by doing that.
Let's see. Okay, but the thing is that right now he's lucky to get. He's looking at 3/10 of a penny, and to raise about 300 million. So
because he hasn't put the want to in the minds of the people. He's got to put the want to in their minds and make them realize that I need this, and if I want it, I've got to talk to my legislature and get these taxes passed.
Okay, Jim, go ahead.
Well, I tend to agree with Butch on that, or Tom on that. I said Butch. That was the name we called Tom Aswell years and years ago. But
just call me in time to eat. That's all.
But Steve, I mean, it's kind of a catch-22. You say, well, we don't have the money, but he really can't go out and promise anything. Well, he can take several approaches. First of all, he can take the Earl Long approach when asked, look, Governor, when you ran, you said you're going to build this road down in around the area. And what do I tell him? In fact, it was Judge Reggie who told me this story, and he was the one that went to see the governor. And the governor thought for it. He says, tell him I lied. Tell him I lied. So, I know we want to
yep, that's a true story.
But no, I think that that there is a momentum that can be built up. There are a lot of state needs. We need this additional revenue to meet these state needs, and we need your help. So he just hadn't done enough of that. He's there's been some occasional speeches, and he'll talk a good bit, but I don't see a calculated effort to really build this groundswell. And Steve, like you said, what are all his alternatives? Now, I also think, as Butch said, he's not been twisting arms. He does a little soft sell, but there's still some things he can do. There are state facilities throughout this state in various legislators' districts. Quite frankly, some of them are on the chopping block. I fought for years to keep the tourist center up in Vidalia, Louisiana, right across from Natchez, Mississippi. And you really couldn't justify it in terms of the numbers, but it's in my district, and I fought hard to get it. And finally, I see it's been shut down. Well, the legislators up there have been very supportive of the governor. So I'm saying within the purview of what he's got, he can do so. He hasn't tried to arm twist. He'll come in and talk to you, but I think he can find some ways to do some arm twisting. Legislators want people appointed to levy boards and to a variety of state jobs. There's a number of things he can say. Now, look, I was there for you, and I need you there for me. I don't see that give and take, that arm twisting, quite frankly, that Tom is referring to.
Okay, I have some breaking news. Let me go ahead and put it up, and unfortunately, you guys can't see it, but everybody else watching will be able to. And it's a email from one of the people that a text message that Twitter message that one of the people that we had as a guest, Elizabeth Crisp, from the Advocate, and she says, now get this, in a 76-26 vote, House has passed temporary sales tax bill that would mean about $370 million towards closing the fiscal cliff. That's the House. So if it passes the House, and we're talking about 370, okay, what are we looking at? Are we looking at, it'll pass the Senate, but then does the governor then try to get additional 300? But still, that's big news. 370 million. The other day he had, 61 votes? So now he got 76, which is what you were talking about, Jim. Go ahead.
Well, I think that's good news to get the process moving. And of course, John Alario, the president of the Senate, has been, I think, more sympathetic to possibly finding a way to improve the revenue situation. We saw the Senate take a firm stand and not back down on the Harris situation that perhaps we'll have time to talk about. So that's good news. There were 6 more votes needed and I'm not sure what the process was. As you just pointed out, Elizabeth talked about this temporary sales tax. Is this looked on as the final number? Or is there more money going to be needed? If we're still $300 million short or $250 million short, where does it come from? There's still lots of unanswered questions, but this is an important step forward, quite frankly. Is the House going to wash their hands of the whole thing and say, we are through, that's it, and not consider any other ways to cut this hole? If they don't cut the hole, then our cut's going to take place dramatically in higher education, in the health situation we've talked so much about. So there's still a lot of answered questions. If it's a 6 or 7 state process, we're on about stage 2 of 6 or 7 steps, Steve, to get through the next couple of weeks.
Tom, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I thought he threw the ball to you. I agree with Jim, but what is it? 370? You said?
Yeah,
that's not going to be. Yeah, that's not going to be enough. What are they after? 600? I think that's what the governor wanted. And if they don't get it, then something's going to have to be cut. And if they have to cut higher education again, I don't know what's going to happen with higher education. They funded TOPS, but you've got a lot of building going on around these college campuses by private contractors. This is a thing that started up at Louisiana Tech, and it's caught on statewide now. They get local investors to build these apartment complexes, and the colleges guarantee the funding, and so it's a win-win for the contractor for student housing. But if they don't have students to fill them, somebody's going to have to eat that, and that's a consideration they're going to have to look at. And if they cut higher education, that's going to impact that. So there's a lot more to this than meets the eye in the House and Senate, because I mean there's a lot of private funds that depend on this budget. So there are many ramifications still to be considered, and I think they're going to have to get more money. I don't think $370 million is going to do it.
So Jim, let me ask you a question as a follow-up. And so what if the Senate came and said, okay, we'll match at 370? Okay, so you got both of them saying, okay, here's the deal, we matched 370. Is that the end of the process, or now, I mean, what's it look like if the governor says, okay, well, that's just the first part. Now, we need to get more money. I mean, from both a legislative standpoint as well as just a political standpoint. I mean, he vetoed the first, budget. So how does he go about handling this now that you got the 370?
Yeah, I mean, if you got 370, then his choices are to suck it up and make internal cuts, hope that the revenue situation improves, the price of oil goes up to where he could look at reinstituting funding maybe in the fall if the revenue estimate conference comes up with more money because of oil prices and other savings that take place, and roll the dice, or he calls another special session. That's about, and he said he'll call as many as necessary to deal with this. So if, let's assume the 370 holds up, I think you're going to see letters going out to nursing homes that we saw before, even more so, cuts that are ballyhooed. I know he was accused of playing politics by trying to stir up anger amongst those who are going to be on the end of the cuts. He ought to stir up a heck of a lot more anger. I don't think he stirred up enough anger, quite frankly. And so choice for two. Accept, roll the dice, hope for the best.
That's part of what I said you should do.
Yeah, or come back with another special session and say, legislators, you didn't do enough, and so we're going to try again. And those are his two choices. He's down to that.
So if you're Republican, how are you going to play that? I mean, obviously you wanted Republicans, generally speaking. I mean, obviously they want to be able to cut as much as possible. They don't want to raise any taxes. They won't get reelected. So if the governor's got 370, they're going to say, well, look, I mean, my God, we got you, you're halfway there. So you're going to have to compromise.
Well, will the governor dig his heels in? I don't think, 300 I don't know what the number is going to be when all is said and done, Steve, but $300 million is a lot of money.
370.
I can go into every statewide official's budget, since I held 2 statewide offices and I know the budget process, and I could cut all across the board on all of them and probably come up with $15-20 million. I think maybe a little more than that. That's a far cry from 300. So some fairly significant cuts are going to have to be made, and I don't think the governor wants to do that. And so I thought this is not a fait accompli, though. It's halfway home to the process, and there will be lots of negotiating over in the Senate. The Senate, by and large, traditionally has been much more responsive to the governor and to these kinds of needs, particularly with John Lario as the president. And so this is far from being a slam dunk, a done deal. And so as we speak, if this passed, you can sure bet that key senators are meeting with the governor's people and the governor right now as we speak to see what those options are on the table. We'll know more about that in the next couple of days.
So, Tom,
well, Jim, if the Senate does come up with a funding more closely in line with what the governor wants, then it's going to have to go into conference committee. How do you see that playing out if it comes down to that? I mean, because the House, as you said, the House has dug its heels in.
It was the Senate that killed the conference committee and the part of the Senate that killed the Harris deal. So now will the House feel like it should take the same tactic and kill it, knowing that if they kill it, let's just say the Senate finds a way to put another couple of $100 million in there, the governor says we can live with that. If the House then kills that, does not cooperate in a conference committee, then of course the House is going to have to recognize, well, now we've killed the entire budget. So are we prepared to answer to our constituents about coming back for a 7th special session? And that puts them on the spot.
So
it does.
So here's a question I have. The conservatives have been saying, Republicans have been saying, look, this is not a tax extension. This, if you raise, in terms of the 1 penny sales tax, if you raise any money in terms of sales tax or income tax, then you are actually you're raising a tax. I mean, you're raising money via tax. So now they've done it. So are they going to say that no, it's just an extension?
Well, when you say
that, it harkens back to when Jindal was governor and he refused to renew the cigarette tax because he said he wasn't going to implement any new taxes. It wasn't a new tax. It was a renewal.
I'm actually jesting about that, but the logic is really it's pure logic, and that is, I mean, a good friend of mine, one of the conservative lobbyists, was saying, wait a minute, this don't you understand? This is not. If we get this any additional money, you're talking about an increase in taxes. That's been his position. So I'm just saying, well, okay, so is that what we have now? Is that what we have? And that's what
I think, Steve, I think if I could say this, when you say they, I don't think the Republicans are speaking with one voice. There's a lot of turmoil within the Republican Party. A lot of Republicans who are not at all pleased with Barra, the speaker right now. There's been quiet talk about even removing him before the next election. There are probably 15 or 20 more moderate Republicans, some that represent Baton Rouge, for example, and some other cities throughout the state, that might be a little bit more flexible to make up the difference to go ahead and get the 70 vote approval. And so if they're close, I know the governor doesn't have a lot to promise, but if he's within 2 or 3 votes, look, if I were in that governor's chair, I'd find ways to get those 2 or 3 votes over the top. And I think if Edwards wants to, he'll be able to do so. So, like I say, this is a big chess game going on, and there's been 6 or 7 major moves, but it still is not a fait accompli. There's still a ways to go, and a lot of jockeying in the next 48 to 60 hours, quite frankly.
Interesting. Tom, is it a extension in your opinion, or is it an increase?
I don't see it as an increase at all. It's a continuation of a temporary tax, of course, but it's also cuts that temporary tax in half, 1 penny to a half penny. So I don't know how you can call it a new tax or a tax increase. I just don't see how you can do that. You're getting into semantics, and I guess semantics are in the ear of the beholder.
Well, that's all we hear out of Washington. That's all we hear out of Washington. Well, the Democrats, we reduced your taxes. Instead of 1 penny, you're only paying down to a half now. So we reduced your taxes. Republicans are going to say, no, wait a minute. Everybody knew this tax was going to stop. It was not going to be extended. This is for a short term. And if we vote to extend it, that's an additional tax increase. So both sides are going to have their way. But that's just the norm in Washington, D.C. That's nothing new. We hear that every day out of Washington. So
sure, yeah.
Yeah, it just the point I'm making though is that it does put some Republicans in a bind. That's really the point that I'm making. That because of the position that they have taken, which is the Bobby Jindal position, that is a extension is a tax increase, and that's what they've been arguing. And they're saying that you're not telling the truth if you don't look at it like that. So it's going to be tough for them, I think, to if they were part of the increase, it's just going to be tough.
Well, the other thing you got to factor is to certain key Republicans who they're going to try to get. You've got a number that are term limited that aren't going to be around, and so it's not like your voters going to rise up in arms. And if you're say in the Baton Rouge area and trying to look out for LSU, then you say, look, you're representing your constituents. Anybody jumps on you, and you're not running anyway. Over a third of the legislature is not even running again. So all that will come into play. I think there will be some demographics going on to where you look at key legislators. Are they running for election? Where do they live? Is there something they need that is producible? And zeroing in on them, and I think that they're going to try to make it work that way. But we've got a long way to go, is my point. The jockeying is going to go on through the next couple of days, and we'll have a much better picture on this whole thing by the middle of the week.
I've got another tweet here I just put up. It's from the Tom-speaking on NOLA.com, Julia O'Donoghue. Says, here's Walt Legay's budget bill that allocates all of the $648 million in its current form that hasn't been raised yet. He wants to bypass appropriations and vote to get it on the floor. So, circumvent the committee, put it on the floor, $648 million in the current form that hasn't been raised yet. I don't know if she's saying that 648 hasn't been raised or, say 370 of the 648.
I would think 370 of the 648. And that's just one more move in the chess game here. Legay, one of the key Democrats, is going to try to go around the process. And there's 25 other options out there right now, all being discussed. That's why I say to think, well, the House has passed this number, and that's going to be the end of the debate. There's still a number of cats to pull out of the bag, and that's what they're looking at right now. Here the budget passed the House 30 minutes ago, and now Legay is already looking for another opportunity. So there are just a number of options to the point I'm making.
Okay. So let's see. I'm just reading an article right now from AP, and it says that Monday's vote broke through the House logjam. Let's see, Tom, is that you typing?
Yeah.
Okay. Didn't know if there was an animal.
I'm sorry, I didn't know you could pick that up.
That was that big rat we see on your desk pretty regularly, Steve.
Gotcha. So it says House bill would renew 1/3 of an expiring 1% sales tax, eliminate or lessen some sales tax breaks until 2023. So this is going to be a little bit longer, assuming that it passes the Senate and goes all the way. She also says the bill raises less money than Edwards wants, but his administration lawmakers who want a high sales tax rate urge passage to continue negotiations as the June 4th session deadline edges closer. The new budget year begins July 1, and so that's the latest from the AP. And so I think they answered some of the questions that you were raising, Jim.
Well, you're right. We've got a whole week. We got a week to go in this session. And so, as I say, within 30 minutes after the vote, Leger had an option. There'll be a number of options out there. The Senate has some options. John Alario has options. So this is just one step in a 7 or 8 step process. And as I say, we'll have there could be 15 more proposals out there in the next couple of days, Steve. So again, there's a long way to go. And as I think the reporter for the AP said, Melinda, whoever wrote that article, said, this the logjam has been broken. So we got a little movement going on now. We didn't have a movement in the last session. We haven't had any movement up till now. Now we've got the logjam going. And so hopefully that will spin off some other options out there that we'll be able to discuss here in the next few days.
Okay, so let's see. Dillian Murchison saying they can't hear me in the background. Okay, so I'm sorry to hear that. Let's see. Let me see who else is making some comments real quick. And that's on Facebook. Kathy Weigel Billings says hello to Jim.
Hey, Kathy. Hey, Kathy.
And let's see. I know we had a question here. Let me go ahead and put it up real quick, and so you can respond. Okay, Aaron Christopher said, what other solutions to the budget problem has been proposed aside from raising taxes and cutting funds from current projects? Question from Aaron Christopher.
So what other options is that what he's saying? Well, obviously, and I think, Tom, you can weigh on that. That's, those are the two options. I mean, you cut or you raise more revenue, is what you do. And now I think, you there, Steve?
Yeah.
There are a number of tricks. There's a number of, no, I say tricks. There's a number of options in terms of extending certain obligations and cleaning out bank accounts where money has not been spent, that Jindal pulled, quite frankly, and cleaned out and was able to come up with additional funds in 1 year. The problem was he was taking one-time money that he was using to fill a gap, and it was not recurring money. It was going to come back again. There might be in some account licensing fees that were there that were in excess of what was needed. Well, maybe it might be needed this year, but needed next year. So, and there was such a reaction to that, a negative feedback on Jindal, that some of the sleights of hand that the governor could use are probably limited to him because of all the criticism Jindal took. I know when I was Secretary of State and Insurance Commissioner, we got down to the end of the fiscal year, and I had $500,000 left in my equipment account where I hadn't spent. My staff was urging me, look, maybe we wouldn't spend it now, but the next 6 months, we need new computers, we need desks, we need whatever. So go ahead and buy them now. And that's something the statewide officials often did to clean out their budgets. So you could put a stop to a lot of things that are an option, but quite frankly, to make up the kind of money needed. When you're talking about a couple of $100 million in answer to the question of the viewer, you got two options: raise more revenue or make some significant cuts. And that's about the only options to get that. You might scrape up 25 to 50 million, but to get that kind of money, you need those two options. That's really all you have. That's a good question. Good
I
question.
agree.
So okay, let's just shift gears for a real quick second. We have a couple more minutes, and let's talk what's going on the national scene. Anybody wants to venture on the latest controversial topic of the moment?
Well, you mean of the hour, as Tom and I talked about, I think earlier today or yesterday. I mean, it changes by the hour, in terms of what's happening in the national scene.
It does. I was on the Youngster show a month or so ago, and he asked me what I thought about some position of Trump. I said, well, gee, I don't know. I said, let's wait 30 minutes and see what the new position is. And that's realistic, unfortunately, because the guy just he shifts and moves like Mercury.
But you know what happens? I do a syndicated program on the weekend. I did it yesterday, and one of the questions was, Trump had called a bunch of illegal immigrants that were part of an M13 gang, a vicious gang, animals. Well, quite frankly, I think they are animals. They rape, they murder in great numbers. I think they are, not because they're immigrants, but anybody that acts like that is not worthy of being a decent human being.
I'm not going to put myself in position of defending M13. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, that's right. But here's my point. The Washington Post editorializes that was completely inappropriate. No matter what anybody has done, nobody should be considered an animal, no matter what they've done. But, I don't agree with the Washington Post, and I'm fairly moderate. And I think that the press often plays into Trump by taking such an adversarial approach to the guy. I mean, I don't care. The worst thug that doesn't do 100% of things wrong. I was watching. I used to watch Morning Joe in the morning. I get up pretty early. I get up at 5:15, and while I'm drinking my coffee and kind of going through email, I'd turn on MSNBC. And Joe Scarborough, a Republican, used to be fairly moderate, had Donald Trump on the show, was a Republican from a conservative area in South Florida. Now every show is nothing but anti-Trump. Anything Trump does, they take the complete opposite approach. And look, even a broken clock is not wrong. Two times during the day, they don't give the guy any break whatsoever. And I think they play in to helping Trump, quite frankly. So on the national,
they also lose their credibility when they do that.
That's right. This whole FBI thing. Look, there's a little smoke to that. It should be investigated. But oh my gosh, he's just a dead wrong, beating up on our great law enforcement. And they're not all that great. They've made some mistakes. So there's a middle ground that the press has not seized upon that plays right into Trump, quite frankly. And Steve, you asked what the issue is. Well, the issue is it could be Korea today. It could be something else tomorrow. But whatever the issue, Trump seems to gleefully build on the press reaction. And I think that a lot of the national press seem to be so adversarial that helps the guy, quite frankly.
It's going to help. It's going to help him with 35% who will support him even if he shoots somebody on Fifth Avenue. So, certainly will bolster whatever support he needs from that group.
Now, Steve, I would disagree.
Wait, hold on. I'm not finished though. Let me just finish. And to say that, there's another 10% or so that he's able to sway a little bit here and there. It goes back and forward. To make to deal with your point though, look, what happened this weekend was, I think, a very good issue, very, very illustrative of what you're saying. Number one, he said that he made a statement about, not being able to go forward with the North Korea deal. His communications person made a statement and said, something to the effect of that it is nearly impossible. He didn't use the word impossible, but the way he framed it was, look, how are we going to do this? So the New York Times came back and made a mistake and said that he said it was impossible. Trump goes back and says, well, I don't know who the New York Times, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't know who the New York Times is referring to, but they're making up a communications person or spokesperson. Well, the Times got it wrong. He didn't say it's impossible. Okay. However, they weren't making up this guy. The guy did say it's nearly impossible. So here you have a situation where Trump had it wrong, and he debased the truth, and you had the New York Times had it wrong and should have apologized and got it right. Okay, so you can't take just one side on this. It happens over and over again. Okay, you have one side who's just going to hear one side of the argument, and you do have another side that's, like you said, in terms of Joe Scarborough, who's only going to push the other side of the argument. So it's I'm getting very upset about and tired of the fact that Trump has no credibility and his people will just ignore, his lack of credibility. And I'm getting tired of the media not apologizing when they've gotten it wrong.
Yeah, well, I'm in that 15% you talked about, and
Sure, I know you are
critical of much of what the guy does, and I think he's made I was as a veteran, and I'm a veteran. I served in the Army and served 12 years in the National Guard when I didn't have, and I was not drafted. I volunteered to do all this. And here Trump comes out this morning and tweets, well,
right.
It's Veterans Day, and I know the veterans would be very pleased at all the great things I've done as president, rather than the families of those who've lost their life, which is what we're supposed to be recognized on Memorial Day. He went completely the other direction. I just I was disgusted by what the president.
He makes it about him.
Yeah, it was all about him, me. So I'm swung really again. On the other hand, the animal quote, I agree with the animal quote. I think the M13 should, whatever they are, should be wiped out and gotten rid of, or go into jails just like a terrorist would. So it's that balance out there, Steve. But the point I was making to start this conversation is that legitimate news, and you mentioned the New York Times. I subscribe to the New York Times. I curl up with it every morning, and I also subscribe to the Wall Street Journal and read both those papers each morning. Of course, I go to Bayou Buzz is the first thing I do. The second I get it before I brush my teeth. But outside of Bayou Buzz, I read the New York Times, and they get it right a good bit of the time, but so often, as you say, you play these extremes, and of course, I can see why those who oppose Trump would play the extremes, because they're responding to his extremes. But neither side is serving more moderate viewers like I am, I think, like you are, Steve, and I know Tom is, who just want to see a straight shot in terms of what the problems are and what we can do to solve them. And a lot of decent Americans are not getting that kind of response.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, no, I just listened to Jim. Got nothing to add to that. I agree with him completely. We just, you can't just pound somebody all the time. You can't beat up on Jindal all the time. You can't beat up on Trump all the time. You certainly can't beat up on Obama all the time, which is what Trump does. So you've got to have some balance and your criticism and praise. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Fox News can't praise Trump all the time and call and call everybody spies all the time either. So
yeah,
it's just we're getting in. We're developing this parallel universe, alternative universe, where, like Rudy Giuliani saying that truth is relative, and that's really where we're heading, and it's really unfortunate.
You know what I get really confused at? If you guys haven't done so, Sean Hannity comes on Fox at 8 o'clock every night, and I tape it because I want to watch the first 3 minutes, because I want to roll my eyes how over the top he is. Breaking news! Trump does this, and this, his breaking news is so over the top and so slanted that it kind of gives me about a 2-minute laugh before I go ahead and erase it. I watch it every night. It goes right to what you're saying. So, Steve, with that, I've got about 6 little nieces here waiting for me to take them swimming. So JB, as they call me, has got to move on to a lot more important things than Donald Trump. So,
gotcha. Listen, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm sorry if we had some audio. I worked on it all this afternoon. I'm not sure what's going on, but I think it may have just been my audio, but that's okay. I had nothing to say anyway. And it's the first opportunity for Tom Aswell to join us, and we'd love to have you back again before the legislative session is over, Jim. You can call in anytime we do a show, and you can call in from North Carolina, and just like Tom.
I've got my laptop with me with Google
Gotcha.
Plus. I'll be able to. I might be in the woods somewhere or on a mountaintop, but I'll sure be with you, Steve.
Well, good. Okay, so I'm going to hit a couple of buttons. Please stay on for just a second. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody.